Afternoon and good evening. Welcome to Open Up, our live talk show. I'm Will Barbour. I'm the host of today's show. I'm the funding coordinator at Voice of Men 360. Voice of Men 360 is a non-for-profit organization founded in 2020 and is based in Toronto, Canada. Voice of Men 360 was born out of seeing a tremendous need and stepping up to provide services to help support and overcome men's and boys' life challenges. We are part of International Men's Day. International Men's Day has been serving for over 21 years. And so far, 90 countries around the world have joined together doing various activities regularly. International Men's Day follows 6 pillars, which is the overall well-being of boys and men. We follow in the same footsteps. So why open up? Because we men do not open our hearts and we're not willing to share often enough. That is why I want to create an open space to allow an individual to share their life journey and talk through it on this show today. Before I introduce our special guest today, I'd like to remind you that Voice of Men's 360's mission is always delivered in good faith towards peaceful harmony. The views and opinions expressed today are not the opinions of Voice of Men 360. We're just talking. We're not experts. Do not quote us. Our organization engages in discussion to offer inspiration and create awareness. We are not experts providing professional advice. Thank you very much. So today's guest, we've got Sibi Selvanathan. Sibi is a author. He's known professionally as an author. He's Tamil Canadian writer, renowned for his vivid imagination and storytelling, writing short stories and fan fiction since his childhood. The Legends of Illymuria series. It's his first journey into sharing a new world with his many readers. An engineer by day, Sibi loves to spend his free time writing stories, reading books, playing sports, and planning the next great adventure. So welcome to Open Up.
Oh, thank you for having me, Will. A pleasure to be on the show with you guys today.
Thanks for coming. Is there anything you want to say to address the crowd before you get into this interview kind of format in our show?
Yeah, I mean, when Voices of Men 360 first reached out to me, I thought it was a absolutely fantastic initiative for the world, especially with men being more comfortable opening up and sharing their difficulties when it comes to mental health and their lives. So I was very happy to show some support to an organization that is doing a lot of good in this world, and happy to be here and have the opportunity to share my story with you all.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming out. You seem to like sharing stories because you're an author, right? So what got you into writing?
It was actually when I was a kid. Like I love to read stories, and then the idea of the author having full control over what they share and the words they put on the page. And my father actually was a poet back home in Sri Lanka, and then he used to get some of his poetry published in the newspapers. And so I guess he passed down that passion for writing to me. And so I started writing as a little kid because I want to be a professional athlete when I grew up, but the side thing was to be a professional author as well. And so I started writing short stories and writing fan fiction. And first it was just like 3-4 page stories on a piece of paper. And then afterwards I started typing it up. And, writing has no deadline. You can write at any point at time in your life. And I enjoyed it when I was a kid, and I enjoy it now.
Awesome. Well, you definitely got the professional part too. So you mentioned your father, he was a poet, and that so was it like you were reading and writing together as a kid, or like how did that transfer from father to son, and like what was that like?
Yeah, so my dad always encouraged my love of reading for me and my siblings. So whenever we wanted a toy, he wasn't so happy to get it for us growing up. But if we wanted to go to the bookstore and buy books, he was more than happy to get what we wanted. And, not growing up the most affluent, I really appreciated him spending the money he made on things like that really helped push our passions when it came to like writing books and playing sports as well. And he would write and he'd show me in the newspaper. Unfortunately, I can't read my mother tongue, but just knowing that was his work in the paper and it was published, like I wanted to do something similar as well.
Cool. Yeah. So it wasn't like directly like, here, let me mentor you, be an apprentice writer kind of thing. No. It was like writing's cool and do what you like and find something that you love, and writing happened to be what you found.
Yep, that's exactly how it went. He enjoyed it, and then I guess I also enjoyed it.
Cool. So what kind of sports did you play too?
I grew up playing hockey. I played ice hockey, and then I stopped that in high school, but I also played soccer. So for soccer, I actually got to a decent level in the Ontario soccer pyramid, and that was great. Like I played against guys who are playing pro right now, way back. But then I wasn't on their level. I could play. I could hold my own on the field, but I wasn't at their level. And then afterwards, I got into coaching as well. And so a couple of the kids that I coach have been signed to Toronto FC's academy. And so, I always wanted to stay in the game, and teach. And, my passion for the game, I pass it on to all the kids that I've trained.
Nice. Yeah, I grew up playing hockey, and I got way more into coaching once coaching started. Like that's just, it seems so much more interesting to connect to people that way,
Yeah, for sure.
So then writing is something that's sort of innately expressive, right? Like you have something inside of you and you put it out on a page and you share it with people, right? Is that an aspect of writing that you're drawn to, or is that like a collateral thing? Like what you mentioned in the introduction here that you like what Voice of Men is trying to do here and what we're trying to like reach out and like inspire people, and you mentioned coaching. So like, is that the thread in writing too?
Yeah, so when it comes to writing and me being able to put out my own story, what I really wanted to do was show a lot of representation as well. So all my characters are from my Tamil cultural background, and so all their names are there. But it's a very westernized story in the sense that they grew up here, but it's a fantasy story. So there's a fantasy land where we get into, and I based a lot of it based on like my Tamil culture as well, like ancient stories that we have. So the premise of my book is there's this land called Ilamuria, which is an ancient land that's considered lost, kind of like Atlantis in the Indian Ocean. But in my story, it's a fantasy magical land that people go back to because they have ancient roots there. And that is what I really, really want to kind of get out into the world. It's more of a kind of Western society story, but it has a lot of South Asian and Tamil kind of cultural references and mythological and historical references in there. And so marrying the two gave me a lot of creative control over the story, which is what separates me from, I guess, all the other fantasy stories out there.
Yeah, it has a basis in Tamil culture. That's really cool. So I think like that bridge is sort of interesting, right? Acknowledging sort of like different worlds and stuff, and like bringing things together into the story. So what would be something that would make you say it's a Western story?
Tamil definitely. So I was born and raised here. So, and a lot of my Tamil friends as well, maybe were born and raised here or they came here at a young age. So there's kind of that divide being where your parents grew up back home and we grew up here, and then you have to kind of integrate the cultures together. So there's a lot of great things that happen in there. So we see some of the great things of Tamil culture, like our love of family, our get-togethers, our food, and all of that. But there's also some of the struggles where in the Western society things are a lot more open and stuff are out there. And so trying to integrate those values into my characters. So my main character, one of the biggest things that he wants to do is please his grandmother and make sure that because she was the one that raised him, that she has all of the that he can do whatever it is that she asked him to do. And that's him putting a lot of pressure on himself, which is kind of something that I find with some Tamil youth out here. They feel the pressure to become big and successful, to take care of their parents, right? And sometimes it's that could really hurt them in the long run, where it's hard for them to just be themselves. So I try and kind of put those kind of character values out there and show how my characters all deal with that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's really relevant to sort of like the younger, like millennial generation, sort of, just because launching has such a burden culturally for some people, like providership, you know what I mean? Like that's a really big part of being a man for a lot of people, right? So you're defining your success based on whether or not you can support your parents, right?
Yes.
Where Western kids might still be looking for handouts even on their deathbed, right? Like,
yeah,
kind of brutal.
yeah. No, definitely, I agree with you there. It's hard. It's also hard to compare that sometimes when we talk to my non-Tamil friends, and then they see things differently, and it's through no fault of anyone else's own. It's just how people grow up culturally at home, and you can see the differences.
Right. Yeah, no, I really like those values though, like indigenous circles and stuff, like matriarchs in the family, like the accountability to grandmothers in general. Like those are just like, even in my upbringing, those are things that are like really important things, right? Like that's not the same as like a patriarch yelling at you because you're not good enough, you know? It's like grandma, right? Like that's nurturing. Cool. Yeah, sorry to dwell on that one. So what were some of the challenges that like you and your friends went through in your school and university days, and like how did you go from this like youth to this like engineering student and then now to an author at the end?
Yeah, so I was always a very technical kind of student, especially in high school. Like I was really good at math and the sciences. So, and I didn't want to be in school forever. So, like on the doctor side of things, that's the way I saw it. So, engineering seemed like it was the way to go. And so, but I always still had the kind of passion for writing while I was there. So while I was in engineering, I made my friends. And networked well because I graduated over 10 years ago, and a lot of the guys I work with we're all more senior managers in our company now, so we do keep in touch here and there when it comes to like job opportunities and such. But I always kept my passion for writing and somehow tried to integrate it. So when I was in some of my courses growing up, I would have to write the engineering design documents. And so that wasn't very fantasy story kind of side of things, but it was more of a technical documentation. And I still enjoyed that as well because it was kind of combining the passion for writing and on the technical side of thing when developing a product or a software. And then since then, started work, and I didn't write for several years, but I guess it was more of the COVID lockdown where I suddenly had so much free time. I didn't have to coach because we had all of our practices on hold. So one day I just finished work and I was just sitting there and saying, "Oh, I got nothing to do," and I decided to start writing notes for my story. And then year and a half later, I was able to release it.
So that's like actually almost a remarkable timeline.
Yeah.
Because the number of people that have ideas that they write down,
yeah,
and that you can synthesize that into a book in a year and a half like that. Good job.
No, I appreciate that. It was just I wanted to commit to it, and so for the first kind of 6 months, it was only my wife that knew I was writing it. But once I got to maybe the third or fourth draft, and I was using this page I found online, like kind of this community of self-published authors, and there was a lot of really, really good advice in there on how to write. I tried to write the perfect story in my first draft, and I was getting so frustrated until I read some tips online that said no one's going to read your first draft. It's just put it in point form notes, call it every character Bob if you want, and then change the names after, right? You don't need and make it very sound dull, like he walked into store, she picked up some food, she got into fight, something like that. And because you just want to lay out your story. And then when I started rewriting or editing and doing my drafts, that's when I realized, okay, this is where I can really start to make it pop, right? And that when I kind of had that kind of timeline and I had those steps laid out for me, I thought, okay, this made it a lot easier.
Yeah, that's very structured.
Yeah.
So like when you said that you were an engineer and like structured thinker, like yep. Because like whenever I talk to people that are like they really want to write a fantasy book, especially fantasy, it's coming from a place of like Dungeons and Dragons or like video games, and they're like, I have all these ideas, and they get lost in these adjectives and like describing these scenes really vividly. And they never frame out that whole story arc and then go back in and build it back up, right?
Yeah, and then the world building was another one. I had to spend time on that, making sure that the land of magic made sense. I had the right villages in there. I had my magic system was right, and then there's a lot of fantasy creatures in my story, like centaurs, dragons, unicorns, demons, and such. So I had to make sure that they were all able to interact with each other. And as I was building my world, a lot of the villages I named after like five ancient Tamil villages such as Marutam, Kurunji, Mule, Netal. And I tried to do my research when it came to certain naming conventions. When I named my castle, when I named certain landmarks. I don't want to go into too much because that gives away the story, but there was a lot of research into there. So building the world was really, really important. But then I was able to focus on like my fight scenes or my really good scenes that needed a lot of description more in like my fourth or fifth draft. And that's so I kind of focus on different things per draft. One like laying out the story, one laying out the characters, another laying out the wordplay, and then eventually got into a good draft for an editor.
That is so cool. Yeah, like honestly, you said something there that I can appreciate because I'm a fantasy nerd and I play video games and stuff. But you said world building and you said making your magic make sense.
Yes.
And to a lot of people, especially with scientific backgrounds, they're like, once you leave science and you go into magic, things stop being the same rules, right? But you set your rules when you make your world, right? And you have to make sure that it's consistent throughout, right?
Right. Yeah. Like, and magic is like adding that to your story is like opening up a can of worms. Like, how difficult is magic? Do you have time travel? Do you have people that can teleport? Do you have like one guy who has a magic sword that could defeat anyone in battle just by swinging it once? Like those kinds of stories, there you got to be really careful with, because if there's so many things that can be solved by magic, then why even have all these problems? You could just use magic to get rid of them, right? So my way of using it is that, okay, there is magic, but you need to be really, really powerful and really, really in tune with the land to do even the most basic of magical kind of deeds. And so that's why I have a lot of creatures in my story that don't even bother with it because they don't care so much for it. But it kind of keeps it believable and keeps the characters relatable as well.
Nice. Is there anything like mystical, or I don't want to say magic, but is there anything in old like Tamil stories and stuff that you're looking up that suggested magic or like belief in things that weren't necessarily completely 100% scientific?
Yeah, and so that kind of research, I wasn't able to find any references to kind of magic itself. Like there's a sorcerer or there's like a mage that was able to heal someone just by speaking to the wind or anything like that. But what I did try and do is use some of the ancient literature that we had, some of the ancient like books, and I tried to incorporate what was written in those books into my story, and so that we had an idea of where our ancient knowledge came from, whether it was magic or history or science or anything like that. So yeah, so the origins of our knowledge in the real world was the same as in the book I wrote as well.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry to change pace a little bit here, but you mentioned your father is a writer.
Yep.
And you mentioned growing up and seeing him writing in papers and stuff. Yep. Did he talk about any kind of magic or anything like that, or what kind of themes was he talking about when he was writing?
Yeah, I mean, his poetry was more, I think, like environmental, right? Or like, not too sure the exact word for it, but it was very like abstract. So, and didn't really tell a story, but was designed to make the reader think more, right? So for me, I got more into fantasy because those were the type of books that I loved growing up, and I would want to read because the idea of all these different worlds out there was incredible to me, and to be able to create my own world where I have all the creative control was what really drove me or motivated me to write this story.
Cool. I'm gonna have to read it now. Like, you've hyped it up.
Yeah.
So then, what would you have for advice for anyone that's out there that might have ideas that might be able to make them into an author or writing, but they're not necessarily structured right now? Like you have, it's a bit of a gift, right? Because you have the perspective to want to do something and then be able to see the steps to get there.
Yep.
And most people that try writing fail because it's really hard to have an idea and polish it all the way through, right?
Yep.
So what would you for anyone who's listening right now that might have an idea that's wanting to maybe try and write, how should they get started if they don't have a father that's an author to show them how to write?
Yeah, and for me, though, my biggest piece of advice is there is no deadline to release your book. Like, even if someone were to pick up my book now or 10 years from now, it'd still be kind of relevant to their life. And if you want to write a book, I know this is very, very simple, but just write. There are days where I don't feel like it, like I'm not sitting in front of a computer every day writing the next Harry Potter, and there are some days where I write, where I go back and edit and I see what I wrote and I think, oh, this is terrible. I've scratched out entire chapters before, like hours of work saying I can't use this anymore. But it's learning lessons, and then picking up what you want. Like, if you write 100 pages, you might only keep like 60, 70 of them for your story, but then you rewrite those, and then now you have a lot more of a efficient writing because you know what you're looking for. And it's taking your time as well. Like, a lot of people will say, hey, I want to finish a book by the end of the year, but then halfway through the year they haven't started, and they said, oh, you know what, I'm going to give up because I'm not going to hit my deadline. Well, you don't need a deadline for this. Like, right now I'm working on the second book in my series, so I'm trying to figure out when I can release. I used to think, okay, when can I release it? But now I'm thinking in a way of, okay, how long until I finish this current draft? How long until I get my next draft? When can I get my editor involved? And things like that. So if you break it down into steps, it's a lot more attainable as well. Like, the end goal is important, but the steps to get there are even more important.
Action plans for goals.
Yes.
So you mentioned your first draft when you wrote that, like, it was really rough and you're just sort of trying to frame it out to like work with it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Was there ever a stage that you had external rejection? Like, you had an editor read it and they're like, hey, it's not there yet, or like, hey, this isn't good enough yet? Like, how did it just work?
Yeah, and so I think the good thing about the way I did it is I went the self-publishing route. So I had entire creative control over everything instead of going traditional publishing. And I wanted to get in front of like a publicist and traditional publishing, but after reading some horror stories over like how much control they have over your story and what you do and how you market it, I kind of wanted to keep that within myself. So when I first started looking for an editor, I found someone who was Canadian, so that was good, and they had edited many best-selling stories. So I only sent them maybe my fifth draft when I was a lot more confident. And before I hired them, I was actually on like a second or third draft. I was asking for advice the entire way through, and they said that, look, try to write because this is your passion. Try to write because you want to create a story that other people want to read and want to imagine, or that they love. I think that's what you are. That should be your goal for your first book. And then when you start getting to your third or fourth book, that's when you can really start marketing yourself and trying to, get the big Scholastics or Penguin House to get in there. And so when I sent him, I think, like I said, my fourth or fifth draft, he loved it. He said this is better than some of the other things that he's ever had before. And he was my first reader. And that was some of the most, that was the best praise that I had gotten. And that was kind of the motivation that pushed me over the edge to really, really get the book out there.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were like, what's the word I'm looking for? One of the things that you mentioned about why you wanted to bring like Tamil names and like historically relevant things into it. Mm-hmm. Was there ever an aspect where that feeling of disconnection was something negative? Like, do you feel guilt for not being able to read your mother language, you said before?
Not so much, because there's a lot of information online, and that's where I did get some of them. But there's a lot of people in my life that are really, really knowledgeable about the subject. My sister-in-law is actually like pretty much a Tamil historian. That she knows, and she's really good with the culture, and she's really good with our history and everything. So I was able to sit down and talk to her, and I learned a lot, and then that would really help me actually bring me back to my roots. and saying, oh, this is how things work, or this is why these certain traditions are done the way they are. And being able to incorporate that into my story was something that I really liked, because that way, when other people started reading it, and then after I released it, and then they gave me feedback, they're saying, I love it. I love the references that you made. I was able to pick it up. And I thought that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to make the references in my books to the point that, oh, I'm shoving it in your face. I wanted it to be kind of in the background, and people are able to pick it up, because the story is about my characters and their coming of age story, really.
That's amazing. And I think that's really wise of you too, because a lot of things, when you go to cultural things, if you're not a cultural like knowledge keeper yourself, you need someone external that you're accountable to, right?
Yep.
And that's awesome. That is so cool. Okay, so what are some other like challenges and stuff? Like, we've been talking about being an author here. And you've also talked about in-laws. So if you're gonna sort of take yourself from this author place we put you and like talked about you as like a man or like a human being in general, what are some common problems that you've like faced, and how has your writing come into it, and like where is writing truly a job and you can't go to it as an outlet?
Yeah, and for me, I guess it's more when I say I want to do something, I commit to it 100%. When I say, yeah, I'm going to release a book, I get right into it. I'm writing, I'm editing, and all of that, and I'm brainstorming and all of that. The good thing is I do have a very strong support system around me when it comes to like my family and my wife and my friends, that they all like encouraged it, and especially my wife, who allowed me the freedom and the undisturbed time to actually commit to the story. So I'm always be grateful for that. Other challenges are just I guess in life, growing up, life's expensive in Toronto. Making sure that you're working your good jobs, and those are your priorities when it comes to that. Making sure that your family, and I'm the oldest sibling, so making sure that my younger siblings are well taken care of, and I'm grateful that everyone in my family life as of right now is doing well, and we have our health. So all I can do is just be thankful for that, at least, especially in the world today when there's a pandemic going on.
Yeah, your accountability though is just so refreshing. Like, even the way you talk about the other people that you're interacting with, like initially when you say I'm a self-publisher because like I didn't want some publisher to tell me how to publish, like that might sound like something ego, but everything else you've said has been like, I'm accountable to my family, I'm accountable to my grandparents. You know what I mean? Like, oh, that's awesome. That's very manly of you. Thank you. I respect it a lot.
Thank you.
So basically, writing, is that like paying your bills right now? Sorry to ask like that question that bluntly, because you go to work still, right? Like your wife is supportive of your writing, but also when you go to work too, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I still go to work. I'm more of a senior product manager at a startup right now, and that I'm grateful, because that really does help pay the bills. So writing right now, I look at it as a passion project. It's not paying the bills. It's just a side hustle right now. I'm actually still down money after all the money I put into like editing and marketing, but I'm thankful to be able to have the funds to be able to put out a book and get like the better editors and the better cover artists and all of that. And a lot of people, like I said, in the community that I'm part of online, have said that you got to wait until your third or your fourth book before you really start picking up the pace, because at that, there's a lot of people out there who do finish book one of their series and then they never continue, or they never do start something else. And it's hard to hear that, because there's these great stories out there that never get finished. But what people like the publishers or the publicists and the marketers, they want to see someone that can put out a consistent product, in this case, which is a book. So if I can get to book 3, and I'm in no rush for it, like I have a good job, that'll help pay the bills for a while. So even if it takes me like 3, 4, 5, 6 years even to get the third book out in the series, then and we'll see how it goes from there. And then maybe I can start switching or pivoting to a different kind of marketing tactic and try and see what I can do. And maybe, awesome. Maybe by the time I'm 50, it could be my full-time job, right?
Yep. And that's really healthy that you sort of gauge your expectations in it too. Because I think as men, we feel the pressure to be providers,
Yep.
whether it's from our siblings, our significant others, our families, whatever. And I think it's really wise that you recognize your passion project where it's at, and you're not looking at your wife every day with no money that you're coming home with and
Right.
saying, why can't you support me as an author? Don't you love me?
Yeah, no, I would never say that. Like my wife works a good job. She has a very very hopeful and understanding boss which is one of the most important things that he gives her a lot of autonomy over her work, and she gets good work done. But at the same time, she needs some time off. He's more than welcome to give it to her. So I'm very glad because that's good for her mental health. And yeah, and we work together. And like I said, we knock on wood that we're able to pay our bills together.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. See, that's so refreshing. Even talking about the women in your life, so like positive and like healthy. Like,
Yeah. I keep good people in my life.
good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so then what else is going on? What else do you want to talk about? Like I've sort of flew through these questions just talking about
Yeah.
your writing. What is there a time in your life or something you want to talk about, or an experience that led to you being so accountable and open and just like
I mean, I guess that's just the way I grew up, man. I just wanted to ensure that I'm the oldest sibling, so I guess being like a caregiver is something that a lot of older siblings go through and such. But in terms of what I want to talk about, to anyone who's listening, if you want to buy a copy of my book, all you have to do is go on Amazon and look up The Demon's Return or by author S.K. Selva, and it should pop right up. Yeah.
cool. We'll have to check that out.
Yep.
So when coaching and stuff starts up again more, are you trying to talk to the kids that you coach about writing too, or like how do you transfer all this as a mentorship role to the younger people?
Yeah.
Because you've obviously had good mentors.
I mean, it's not so much the actual writing part. It's the more committing to a goal and taking the steps to get there, and being able to see kind of like the long-term plan when it comes to achieving your goals, which is what I really want to impart on the kids. So they all know that I wrote a book, but for some of them, they want to. Not all of them are going to join Toronto CS Academy and become professional soccer players, but I did have one kid who, when they started, they were not the most coordinated, not the most outgoing, very shy, but you could tell how much he loved the game. And I worked with him good for like 2-3 years, and he ended up becoming one of the better players, more of a leadership role. And his mom told me that he was doing significantly better in school, and to me, that is a win just as much as a kid who ends up playing for Canada's national team, right? Because maybe if it wasn't for soccer, having that confidence on the soccer field translated to the rest of his life, right? So me saying that, hey, I wrote a book. Here's like I took it step by step, slowly by slowly, and here's how I got there. And they said, okay, and they say, okay, you know what? My goal is to get into university. My goal is to get a start again. Start a company. My goal is to get a scholarship, right? And then they will say, okay, you know what? This is how I gotta take the steps to get there, and I wish them all the luck that they can, and I'll help them along the way.
When you play sports, are
Mm-hmm.
you a goal scorer or are you a guy that gives passes?
Yeah, when I'm playing soccer, I'm a defender, so I'm trying to help my goalie help my team stop. But if there's a chance for me to run up the wing and get the ball across or even shoot, then I'm taking it.
Nice. Yeah, in
Yeah.
hockey, I was always a stay-at-home defenseman, so I can relate to a lot of this. I think like with sports, like you mentioned confidence and like winning and like being accountable to a team and like all that stuff. But for me, I think that like the biggest thing with sports is learning to lose and then play again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when people score on you, it sucks, right?
Yeah, and when I'm coaching, I have had those bad games. I remember we got murdered one game by a team from Hamilton, a high-end academy, and these kids, they came in with their brand new bags and really expensive equipment and putting together, trying to train hard or whatever. And then my kids, they weren't from Scarborough, so not the most affluent area. And so, but you could tell that my kids had more passion for the game. And so the first time we played them, we did not do well. But I try to impart to the team that, hey, we can take these guys. Don't be intimidated by where they're coming from, right? And that's not to say the other team were like bad kids. They just were trained really, really hard. But I tried to train. They were trained really, really hard in more soccer fundamentals and how to really play. But I try to train my kids to be their own players on the field. A year later, we faced them again, and this time we won, and then that felt really, really good. And I know the kids will remember that as well, because it's a good lifelong learning lesson. Like, you can catch up. Don't worry, no matter where you came from.
Yeah. And I think like the coolest sort of common thread to what you've been talking about here is how the value is so built from like nothing that it doesn't even matter where it is right now because it's on a trajectory, right? Like, I got to read this book, man.
Yeah. Everything is long term. Like, you can't look at someone when they're 15, like 10, 15, 20, and just judge the rest of their lives based on it. Some of the kids that I've coached growing up, I've had kids who were superstars at 10 who didn't want to play anymore at 13, 14. I've had kids who weren't the best at 10 who are now some of your better players at 16, 17, right? You can never project a long-term like trajectory on a person when they're younger, especially maybe a 20-year-old who hasn't gone to university or hasn't had a post-secondary education yet. You never know. At 25, they might have started their own company and are doing very well, right?
Yep. Lifelong learning, being a mature student, you can always go back and do stuff.
Yep, for
Try
sure.
again.
Yep.
So I guess the main focus then is to have a goal, like just want something, right? But how do you say that to our generation? So a lot of the people that are into fantasy play a lot of video games, right? And video games, they give you depressive brain state because they're overstimulating when you're staring at a screen too many hours a day.
Right.
So then when the vision is the challenge and that's what you have, and the action plan, the ability to get there is everything that you have, those are all your strengths. How do you encourage people to take that step one of wanting something?
Yeah, and that's the hardest step. Step one is always the hardest step into doing something, because you're kind of stepping out of your comfort zone. And a lot of times that what I try and do is people do come to me at advice, and it's like, well, how did you write a whole book? How did you do this? How did you do that? I told them, it's like, I had no idea what I was doing at the beginning. You've only seen the end goal of me. You didn't see like what I put in to try and get there. Right. And when I tell them about the long hours, it's just, they say, oh, I don't know if I can do that. And I just say, like, you don't have to be like anybody else. Just do it at the pace that you want to do. Whether that means you finish your video games or half an hour earlier, or you stay up later in the night, like a half hour later into the night, or you wake up a half hour earlier and you just want to write one paragraph. Those steps matter and those steps count, right? Or if you just want to like turn your phone off and put it on do not disturb for an hour so that you're not checking it, right? The notifications will still come. You don't need to respond to everything right away, and then just go and do what you want to do. And it doesn't have to even be like writing or anything, whether you say, hey, I want to get fit or I want to work out or anything, just putting your phone away and going for a half-hour walk is something. Doing that for a month every day for a month will completely revitalize your body and things like that. And it will give you, and then once you start, it's kind of like a snowball effect. You'll be motivated to do more things, and you just go from there.
Absolutely. So here you're in a mentorship role, and I appreciate that. Like you've climbed the mountain and you're standing on it. Can you take us back to a time when you were playing sports or growing up that you felt like a failure, and what mentor said what to you to help you keep this context?
Yeah, actually, there's a very important point in my life where that happened, where I was always one of the smaller kids in my classes growing up, right? Because late birthday and all that. So I remember I was cut from two soccer teams, rep teams at 11 and 12 years old, because they said I was too small to play. But I just came back, had back-to-back MVPs in my house league. Now, granted, house league is more of a recreational level, but then my hockey coach at the time was taking over a soccer team, and then he said he was having practices, and I told him, I just won MVP in my house league last 2 years, and then he said, okay, well, why don't you come and try out? And then he was the first one to give me a chance, and from there I went to the first level of rep. Within 3 years, I was able to upgrade to the highest level in the province. right? Again, I guess that was just because I was more of a late bloomer, but I learned my lessons at a young age. Like, because you're one of the smaller kids, you got to somehow adapt your game and change it so that you are able to play against the bigger, stronger kids. But I was able to do that and learn my way around.
Right. So when you talk about your authorship and your writing, sorry to go from sports to writing back and forth so much. What, like, do you see, like, in your fantasies and in the world creation, like, you have these values in life that you use with sports and you use in mentorship and everything. Can boys and men, like, through telling stories, create this perspective? Like, was part of making your world and making your story, like, part of this? Like, what challenges and situations have you been working against with your writing, or is the writing truly just a passion project on the side?
No, it is a passion project, but I have many characters in my story, and each of my characters, the men and the women, have their own kind of backgrounds of how they got to where they were. And a lot of sometimes the struggles that they have were struggles that I've had growing up, and the struggles that my friends or my family have opened up to me that they have had. And how they get out of it, or how they learn to live with it, or how they help each other get out of it. Those are some common themes in my story right now. So, for example, my main character is considered an outsider in the land, and then he's taken in by another character who sees him for who he really is. But that kind of ostracizes him from his old friends, but it helps him realize that his old friends were never really friends. They were just people that took advantage of him, and they were able to kind of support each other in the first installment of my series. And so writing stories could be a good way for young men and young kids in general to kind of put a character that is going through some struggles that maybe they have had, and then try and say, okay, how would my character and the story get through it? How would they fix it? What can they do to help? And then they could use the advice, whatever their character did, and apply that advice in real life to their own kind of struggles.
So do you think that magic itself and, like, the fantasy medium brings out that power when you feel powerless? Like, what feedback and stuff have you got from your authors that, like, how are boys and men using this to contextualize, like, challenges and stuff in their life? You know what I mean? Like, what kind of, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, like, and magic in my world is used to help everyday things, and it's used, like, they use magic to send messages to each other across villages. But in the current westernized world, you have your text, you have your emails, right? So kind of finding a way around it, like, magic is something that can help because it helps you use your imagination. Using your imagination kind of opens different, I guess, portals or parts of your brain, and now you're starting to think of different ways of problem solving, different ways of living. So those kinds of things, when you start thinking about magic, you start thinking, okay, instead of magic, what can I do instead? And it really gives you kind of an action plan to when it comes to, like, achieving a goal or getting through a struggle.
Cool. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense to me. To me, magic's always sort of like a metaphor for when you don't understand the actual mechanistics of how it's working scientifically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, everything, a plane is magic if you don't know what an engine is.
Yeah.
Or a wing.
Definitely.
Or lift or drag.
Yeah.
So then how, for someone that doesn't have an engineering background or this incredible drive of a life of an athlete, and just, this is so healthy, dude. Like, kudos to your parents. Just, like, how do you contextualize all this? If someone had a crappy time, like, if your first team was a bad experience and your second team was a bad experience, and you quit sports because of that, and it's actually because you were going through a divorce and it had nothing to do with you at all. Like, how would you pick it up for someone that didn't have positive experiences with all these things?
Yeah, and I've seen it. I've had friends, I've had family, I've had my own personal experiences where you feel like you're down in the dumps, and you can't, and you're not too sure what to do in that point or that situation. And all I can say at that point is just it's one day at a time, one step at a time, right? The time will pass no matter what, whether you're happy or sad, or you're upset, the time is going to pass. Like how fast it is, how fast it passes depends on your mood, right? So for me, it's one of those. Okay, let me get out of this funk. What's going to really help me? Is doing some physical activity really going to help me? Is hanging out with some friends and just watching a movie or playing board games really going to help me? Is just going for a walk really going to help me? Is discovering a new kind of hobby and trying to learn about it really going to help me? Is going to try a new experience really going to help me? And these things, all they cost really is time. It doesn't really cost money. I mean, you can find some do cost money, but some don't. Like going for a walk does not. All it does is take your time. Is take time, and you can, once you commit to it, you go through it, and it really kind of helps your brain function in a more positive way. And then that, I feel like your mood is kind of um, is kind of motivational in the sense that if you're happy, it's going to be more, you're going to find more happy things. If you're upset, you're going to find more upset things, and it's up to you to kind of tilt your brain in the way that you want to go through. But there's a lot of people, a lot of resources out there that can help, and a lot of things that you can do to help, and that's it. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Well, this is really good. If you want to just keep thinking about that, I think we're gonna have to cut to some announcements about some shows we have going on quickly.
Yeah, for sure.
And then we're just gonna come back and keep talking. Everything you shared has been so good.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so for Voice of Men 360, I've got a few announcements I got to make here. We're Open Up. That's our show that we're running right now. It's every Sunday at 10 in the morning Eastern time. Billy, the Tamil Live Talk Show, is on Sundays at 8 a.m. Eastern. We have our monthly webinar. It's the first Saturday of every month at 10:30 Eastern. And that's where we bring out experts. So they're more talking about concepts, whereas here we're trying to get to know the people. The next one is Saturday, March 5th at 10 a.m. Eastern time. The topic is how is parenting time and access determined with a lawyer. Should be very interesting. We have a monthly special show, The Unspoken Tears, second Saturday of every month from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. The focus is on domestic violence against men, bullying, male sexual abuse, traumas, porn addictions, and human trafficking. And the next one will be on Saturday, March 12th at 10 a.m. Eastern time. The topic is bullying, lateral violence, scars, lessons, and anti-bullying. We have Author Circle, talking to an author today, but that one's just an author circle. We want to bring individuals who have been contributing to the well-being of men and boys through writing. That's the third Saturday of every month from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern time. Our podcast is on all your favorite platforms. 6 platforms, including iPhone, Google Play, all those. Monthly men's group meeting. It's for men, by men, every 2 weeks on Tuesdays from 6 to 7:30 p.m. through Zoom. The next one will be on Tuesday, March 8th. Please join on Zoom. Then we have Pass the Talking Stick, which is Indigenous peer-to-peer support group, fourth Friday of every month from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. on Zoom. Yeah, so I guess we're going to come back to this conversation with Sibi. Do you have anything else you want to talk to us about?
Yeah, I just wanted to let all the young people out there who might be listening to the show that reading really helped me kind of get a quick escape from real life and explore different worlds where fantasy characters, even though their worlds are full of magic, full of allure, and full of mystery, they still had the same struggles no matter what. And reading on how they were able to get out of it and things that they did to become like legends and heroes was something that I always wanted to kind of do myself. So being a reader and picking up a book, especially in the fantasy genre, was really helpful to me. So I highly recommend looking it up, whether you like mystery, horror, fantasy, or even romance or anything like that.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
And what about sports and stuff? Like a lot of people that use sports as an outlet, and even mentorship and peers and everything, relationships, they're locked down right now, right? Like they can't be playing sports. So what's your message to all your I don't want to say students. What's the word for people on your team?
I just call them my kids. For them, it's just I think things are going to be opening up soon, and with the warmer weather, just get out there and play what you can, whether it's soccer, basketball, hockey, even ultimate frisbee, volleyball, tennis. All right, or even just going for a walk or going for a hike. There's a lot a lot of nice forestry in the Toronto area that I didn't even know about until I started looking it up. Those would be great things, get that vitamin D in you, and then that really helps elevate your mood. Highly recommend.
Absolutely. And I'm super biased there too, because I'm an ecologist. So I
Oh, yes.
literally work with the environment in the Toronto area and
Yeah.
enhance it whenever I can.
Cool.
Yeah, I think so. There's been a lot of themes that we've touched on here. The one thing that I would like to try and speak to is what would you say to someone that's really down, that can't necessarily just go outside and get over it, or can't just pick up a book? Like how would you live in the moment and get through when you're not comfortable? Like, is reading a book your coping strategy for escapism?
Yeah.
What would you say to someone that drinks or smokes weed or something like that to escape?
Yeah, and for me, all I can say is one step at a time. Don't look at, if you're down in the dumps, don't look at the goal being, I need to be a completely successful millionaire within a year. Just take it one step at a time, one day at a time, saying, hey, I'm not going to drink tonight, or I'm not going to drink today, or I'm not going to drink this weekend. And then try and find a way to replace it. Instead of drinking, I'm going to have some water instead. And yeah, even if you can't play sports, even just getting up and going for a walk, right? It starts off with 10 minutes, it turns into half an hour, and you won't even be able to recognize yourself in a year. And just like one of my favorite phrases is, a year from now, you'll wish you have started today. And so just one small step at a time, and eventually it adds up and snowballs, and it'll help, definitely.
Awesome. I think it's really cool too that you've been able to just like all the different contexts you've got today has just been really good. What is there anything else for people looking to coach that you would suggest for them? Like what made you feel healthy enough and strong enough to mentor other people? And do you feel flawed when you coach? How do you approach coaching when you don't feel the best yourself?
Yeah, and I have made mistakes when it comes to coaching, but at the same time, I have an approach where I allow the kids to make mistakes as well, and I also admit it when I'll tell to a kid, "Hey, I should have tried you in a different position. Hey, I shouldn't have said this or anything like that." It makes you a lot more approachable to the kids when you start admitting those kinds of things, and it gives them more of a sense of, hey, I can do it as well. And anyone who wants to start getting into coaching or writing, it's pretty simple. Just grab a pen and paper or open up a Word document on your computer and just start typing whatever comes to your head. If you want to get into coaching, there's many different youth sports rec leagues out there, some at the very high, like very skilled level, and some at just a recreational level where you're trying to give back to the community. And you just pick which one you want, and they're always looking for volunteers to start off with, and then eventually make some little side money with it too.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much. I think that's going to be our show for today. Today we opened up with Sibi here. Like, got to check out your book. We'll have a link of that in the description. This is good. Thank you very much for coming out. I hope you take part in more of Voice of Men 360 events. It's just been refreshing. Very refreshing talking to you today.
No worries. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate
it.
No worries.
Bye for now, everybody.